Hi, my name is Megan Elliott. I'm the founding director of the Johnny Carson Centre for Emerging Media Arts. Welcome to Vision Maker Media's first online Indigenous film festival. Vision Maker Media is a native non-profit located in Lincoln, Nebraska in the US. Vision Maker Media empowers and engages Native people to share stories. Vision Maker Media envisions a world changed and healed by understanding Native stories and the public conversations that they generate. Reaching the general public in the global market is the ultimate goal for the dissemination of Native-produced media that shares Native perspectives with the world. Vision Maker Media continues to showcase the most compelling Native stories for public broadcasting on local PBS stations and online. So today I am super excited to be moderating a panel about women empowerment with the incredibly talented Jessie Adler, the director, producer, cinematographer, and editor of The Boxes of Brule. The awesome Michelle Shenandoah, producer of Rematriation. The exceedingly talented Kristen Lapis, the director of Blackfeet Boxing, Not Invisible. And the incredible Sonia Bolo, the writer and director of Rustic Oracle. The major festival sponsors include the Lincoln Journal-Star, Woodland Voices Flutes, Lux Centre for the Arts, Native American Calling, National Native News, Indigify, NB1, FNX, First Nations Experience, NET Nebraska's PBS and NPR stations, Woods Charitable Fund, Humanities Nebraska, the Lincoln Community Foundation, Lincoln Arts Council, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Cooper Foundation, the Race Foundation, the Cherokee Nation Film Office, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Thank you to our sponsors and for making it possible. Today, if we'd been able to be in person, if there was no pandemic, we would all be gathered here at the Johnny Carson Centre for Emerging Media Arts at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So like they do in my original country, which is Australia, I would like to make a land acknowledgement of that the University of Nebraska is a land-grant institution with campuses and programs on the past, present, and future homelands of the Pawnee, Ponca, Oto Missouri, Omaha, Dakota, Lakota, Kaw, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples, as well as those of the relocated Ho-Chunk, Sac, and Fox and Iowa peoples. And we acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging, and take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together today. And with this acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold our communities and institutions more accountable to the needs of Indigenous people. So thank you, we acknowledge the land, and now I'd like each of you to introduce yourselves. We will begin with Jessie, please. If you'd like to say hi, Jessie.
Sure. My name is Jessie Adler. I'm the director, filmmaker of The Boxers of Brule.
And Michelle?
I'm Michelle Shenandoah, and I'm Oneida. I'm the founder of Rematriation magazine and the 10-part series Rematriation Indigenous Women's Voices, of which we have one of our films in the film festival.
Kristen?
Hi everyone, I'm Kristen Lapis. I'm the director of Blackfeet Boxing, Not Invisible, and I'm also a producer with ESPN Films.
Thank you. And Sonia?
Sonia Jungjats. I'm from Ganasadaga Mohawk Territory, but I currently reside in Gatineau, Quebec, and I'm the writer-director of Rustic Oracle, which was my second feature and was shot in my home community of Ganasadaga.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. I have to say, I'm totally intimidated to be moderating this panel. I'm a fangirl of all of your work. I've been watching it this last week and also participating or watching later the Q&As that you've all done with the incredible Shirley Sneve and Rebecca Schlichting. So our topic today is women's empowerment. And so I guess the first question for us would be, what does women's empowerment mean in the context of being a creative, a filmmaker, a documentarian, a lawyer, or a publisher? Sonia, you pulled the best face.
Well, it's a big question.
It is a big question.
What is empowerment? I think, well, now I think it took making room for us. I think that was the big struggle, was to make room. And we did that by like pushing through glass ceilings and breaking down walls. I know that in the film industry now, things are moving forward in the right direction. Here in Canada, a lot of the funding models are trying to reach parity, which is really good. I think that women empowerment is basically just allowing us to make the decisions, the creative decisions, the business decisions, the producing decisions. And I think we're proving that now. The fact that we're sitting here, these magnificent women talking about it, is proof that it is happening.
And Michelle, you would have a distinct perspective, I believe, as a lawyer and as a publisher and somebody who's engaged in emerging media.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I founded Rematriation Magazine as an online multimedia platform in order to be able to tell Indigenous women's stories from our perspective. And I really think that that's like super important when you think about women's empowerment, but specifically Indigenous women's empowerment, is to be able to tell the story, tell not history, but her story from our firsthand perspective, which largely we have been written out of the narrative of history, whether it's in the arts, in media, but certainly also within educational systems as well. And so I think what's happening right now is there's this collective emerging voices and stories of Indigenous women from around the world. And so it's really, really a wonderful time. It's a wonderful time to be a filmmaker, to be a creative, and to be able to put those expressions out into the world. So that's, for me, what empowerment really is.
And I want to come back to you, Michelle, because I really enjoyed something you said last night, or whenever I watched your Q&A, about when you made your Me Too film, about making sure that the Me Too experience, for example, of Indigenous women was not made invisible within the broader movement. So maybe we'd come back to that. But Jessie, would you have something to add about what women empowerment means to you in the context of being a filmmaker?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Michelle and I think Sonia touched on it as well, in terms of, a real collaboration between the women who are featured in the story and making sure that it's their story that is driving the narrative of the film and driving all the decisions that go into making the film, and taking pride in their story and all of the elements in that. And in terms of it being a woman's story, not making it, I feel like I see a lot of films in Hollywood showing these like women empowerment films where it's like they are as strong as men, or they are as bold or brave. It's like attributing masculine characteristics onto these women, whereas I feel like in a lot of our films we are putting forth very feminine qualities, stereotypically feminine, and taking pride in women's role in society and pushing that forward, as opposed to trying to fit some other mold that's been put forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And Jessie, so Kristen, would you have something that you'd like to add also as a creative and producer?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the other women covered it so eloquently, so I'll keep it short. But just talking from a perspective of working with women and sports, being an ESPN films producer, I've kind of dedicated my entire career to telling stories about women being empowered through sports. And I think that, ESPN and a lot of different sports media outlets have kind of not represented women and just how incredible they are as athletes. And I think that's so important, to show that, women in sport are accomplishing wonderful, wonderful things. And I just think Again, it's just something that I've tried to highlight on ESPN throughout my entire career. And, you know, speaking on behalf of my own film, and then Jessie's wonderful film about the sport of boxing, which is considered a very masculine sport usually, but to see these young girls as young as 7, 8 years old kind of embark on this journey through the sport of boxing, and how they become strengthened both physically but also emotionally, and through this sport is really a wonderful thing to see. And I think it's like the best form of female empowerment, honestly.
It's fantastic. And so to come back to you, Michelle, how do we then, if it's in the context of being filmmakers and talking about women's empowerment, do you think the empowerment of Indigenous women can be invisible within that industry, or are there steps that we can take to advance the visibility of women's empowerment for Indigenous filmmakers?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that we have been invisible, and I think that's what leads to all the issues that are addressed in all
the films,
right, that are here on the panel. Really sorry for all that noise that's coming out on the street. I don't know if you can hear it. But let's see, where was I? So yeah, there is a very, very big invisibility, and how do we overcome that as filmmakers? Tell the stories, right? I mean, there's no sort of other way around it. I think the beauty of what's happening socially within the world is that there's much more of an awareness of voices that haven't been heard. So it is a really great time. I really just think it's about, you know, having the courage to go out there and tell the stories, because of the fact that we haven't really had our stories, you know, been highlighted. I think maybe some of the other filmmakers may have experienced this as well, is having some of the characters who are in the films having the courage to come forward and to be able to speak, right, about all the issues that are going on. Or even just, you know, overcoming sort of like this, you know, sense of, you know, being humble, and you don't really put your stories out there, right? So there's also these, you know, small cultural barriers, or sometimes big cultural barriers that can happen. But I think largely, just overall, like Indigenous people's voices have been silenced for so long. You know, so you have this, you know, breaking that silence, and then at the same time also still overcoming the challenge of having people talk. But the great part about a lot of the younger generations is they're ready. They're really, really ready to talk. And then there's so many phenomenal women and, you know, men and children from the communities that are sharing their stories. So it's just a matter of, you know, having folks have the courage to get behind the camera and start putting it together, and here you go.
So how do you do that then? How do you prepare yourselves for your own journey as you make these films? How do you build your resilience? And I think something that I found so brilliant about all of your films was how brilliant your protagonists were. So whether it was a documentary or a feature film, the performances in your feature film, Sonia, were spectacular. Beautiful, beautiful performances. Ivy, my goodness. So how do you prepare yourselves with your own resilience, and then to create that space of empathy to bring out these incredible performances for your protagonists? Because that's hard, gut-wrenching work.
It was. And honestly, I think for me, the key was to keep it as close to what they know about the subject matter as possible. I think in a way our films, whether they are documentary or fiction, because we've been silenced for so long, that we're actually like, we're filmmakers, but it's activism at the same time. And I don't think that there are that many, I think, I'm not saying that it's only Indigenous filmmakers that do that, but I feel like as an underrepresented peoples, we become activists through our films. I think the key I used to make documentaries, and I realized that when you're reaching out to your audience, you're already reaching out to someone who's aware of the subject matter of your documentary. Whereas fiction, you can reach out to a wider audience that are maybe not aware of the issues, but are interested in people, interested in strong stories, and you connect those people through emotion. So for me, the goal with my characters was to create something that other people can, they'll find empathy, right? It's all about empathy. And I feel like if you can if you can get people to feel for your characters, then maybe they will pay attention to the social issues that you're trying to explain in your film. And I think for both Carmen, who plays Susan, and for Lake, who played Ivy, they carried that as well. They wanted people to feel for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So they put their hearts in the work. We had many moments on set where we would just like break down and cry and need to take 5 minutes and just like recenter ourselves. But we allowed for that space. And I think that definitely helped. And it allowed them to feel more authentic and to give more of themselves because they knew the subject was so important.
Yeah. Jessie or Kristen, would you like to comment on that? Jessie, in your Q&A, you talked about arriving in Brule, and then action started. It was action. You're on the clock as soon as you got off the plane. How did you prepare for that?
I was not as prepared as I should have been looking back in hindsight. I think I prepared for a certain aspect of it in terms of, the filmmaking and the equipment, and it was my first film, and so I was thinking about it in terms of production, but in terms of being there for someone who has experienced trauma, I didn't think through necessarily what was going to come up for the women in the film and the young girls in the film in a way that, I think through just being open to their experience and really wanting to be there and supportive of whatever they were going through, we were able to kind of navigate the space together. But it was constantly on my mind, and I think definitely producing a lot of anxiety for me throughout the process. Just making sure I'm taking the right step, because it's very sensitive subject matter that we're talking about, and very sensitive, kind of a precarious situation. So I think the most important thing was just making sure that we were creating a space that they were leading, they were driving the boat, I was following their lead, so that it was constantly something that they were taking ownership of and bringing us in the direction they wanted to go.
And how about you, Kristen? Firstly, how did you find your story, and then how did you prepare yourself for creating it?
Yeah, sure. So, as filmmakers, I'm sure all of us have experienced this. We find our inspiration in the most unlikely places. And I was actually on a plane on my way back from another story that I was producing about a Nepali golfer. She was trying to be the first professional female golfer in her country. And I happened to turn on the film Wind River, which is fictionalized. And honestly, I've heard from a lot of Indigenous women that it's not the most wonderful portrayal of the community. But the film does end with a graphic at the end that says that while there are databases and tracking for every other demographic of missing people, that this does not exist for Indigenous women, and no one knows how many are missing. And it was just such a chilling and horrible thing to read. And I'll be honest with you, at that point in 2017, I did not know a lot about the MMIW crisis. And I just remember getting off of that plane and wanting to know more, and just doing a lot of research and reading. And in that research, I actually found a photo essay that led me to the Blackfeet Nation Boxing Club. And it was a photograph of two girls sparring in the gym in Browning, Montana. And it said that Frank Kipp teaches girls self-defense and fighting for their lives at the Blackfeet Nation Boxing Club after Ashley Loring Heavy Runner, a young girl from the reservation, had gone missing. It basically inspired a lot of girls to join the gym. And I just thought, as a sports producer, how cool is that these girls are kind of taking matters into their own hands, and they're physically training themselves to be prepared should something happen. But at the same time, they're also, becoming more vocal in their communities. And as a lot of others mentioned on this panel already, girls, I've learned in Indigenous communities, have been taught to, be quiet and reserved and not speak up. And so this gym was just the opposite of all of that. Like, they were being trained to be powerful and be, you know, all of the things that, you know, boxing brings out of girls and young women. So it did take a lot of trust. You know, I am not an Indigenous woman. I came into their community as an outsider, and so I had to earn the trust of my subjects and my protagonists. And basically, they had told me that people had come in with cameras before, and they had taken and taken and taken, and they had portrayed the culture and the community in a really negative light. And so I had to you know, give them my word, and basically over time have them learn and trust in me, and know that what I was trying to get out of them was the positive work they were doing in the gym. It wasn't a negative story. And I think that once I earned that trust and really listened to their experiences, I did not know about their experiences. Once I really listened to them, I think we were able to break down those barriers and really, you know, make a really powerful film.
I think it's very powerful. Thank you. I'm going to ask two questions, and then we have a few that have come in through Q&A. But I guess two questions are, and you could take both or either one, all of you. So what has sustained you to help you get where you are? Because even that talk, whether it's finding trust, whether it's being able to make the ethical decisions to make sure that the women or the protagonists are driving the story, to enable, to empower those voices. So how did you build your own resilience and sustain your own creative self in this process? And then the other thing is, what makes you feel like a total badass? Because I think I mean, you're bringing so much healing into the world. There has to be some way of filling that well and looking after yourselves. And I think as women going into any industry, and particularly as Indigenous women coming into the film and television industry, we need that. We need to share that knowledge about how you did it. Michelle, maybe you'd like to start.
Oh, it makes me laugh. You know, we're always trying to stay humble, right? So trying to answer that question.
No, not here.
In terms of the resilience, you know, in sustaining us, you know, keep moving forward. I think for me, what's really important is looking just around community, right? I'm really very actively engaged with a lot of women, a lot of circles of, you know, healing, reclaiming, and, you know, reclaiming identity. And I think it just becomes so imperative for me to be able to communicate that message in whatever way that I can, whether it's to the public, you know, to different, you know, audiences. That becomes really, really crucial for me. And, you know, really being actively involved, you know, within my own culture, within my own communities, I really know and have a good sense of, you know, what's happening, you know, what are sort of the big issues that are either impacting us, or things that we're seeking to change, or we're looking where big changes are being made, right? So I really take all that into consideration. And so, you know, I know we have just one of our films in the film festival, but when you look at the whole series, it's really about like telling those stories of resilience of our culture, really talking about, you know, some of the very, very big issues that impact us, you know, whether it's as Indigenous peoples, or even thinking about humanity and how we have to shift our thinking in order to survive, right? Because we're going on this, you know, direction that really, really, you know, only humanity can change. So I always think about what is the important messages that we as Indigenous women have to share to help the world today. That's what keeps me going. You know, I do a lot of public talking, a lot of presentations, putting my, you know, media out there on Rematriation magazine, which is beyond film, it's multimedia, but I'm always like keeping that in mind, you know, what's needed, and what do we have as Indigenous people and as Indigenous women to share with the world today. So what makes me feel like a badass? It's just such a funny question. I think what I really love is when I see the successes, collective successes, when I feel that, you know, as groups, we're able to be able to communicate that message, whether it comes across in the film, you know, sharing those stories. For me, that's what I take so much pride in. And it just really, you know, it keeps me going. So that's my answer.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to have a go at it? What nurtures you or sustains you, and what makes you feel like a total badass?
What nurtures me and sustains me, especially for when I was making Rustic Oracle, was definitely being surrounded by the right people. I surrounded myself with so many powerful women, not only in the crew, but we shot in my community. So a lot of the women in my community, I also had families of missing and murdered Indigenous women wanting to participate and tell the story with me. So that was very empowering. And I had a lot of other Indigenous women directors that have made films in recent years that I could look up to. So they made me feel very powerful as well, because I knew that it was possible. And I guess all that kind of made me feel like a badass, right? It was very empowering to have all these incredible women with me telling the story. And I take great pride now that it's done, because obviously, like anyone that makes a film, it took me a while to see the good in the film. I kept only seeing what I did wrong and the mistakes I made, and it's such a trait that we need to get rid of. But anyways,
Totally.
Oh, it's so awful.
It's like the bad sticks to you, but the good we
Yes.
just brush off. Yeah.
Exactly. So I was focusing on the bad, and the first screening I did was in my community, and they not only embraced it, they loved me, they loved the film, and they loved me for doing it, and they made me feel like I did the right thing. And that for me was like, okay, I can be proud of it now if I have your blessing and your approval. Like, to have them say that it was good was all I really needed.
Fantastic. Jessie?
Yeah, well, I think I also found most of my strength in surrounding myself with the right people, both, you know, within the community and while filming, but also this was part of my thesis. This was my thesis film. So I had tremendous support from the incredible faculty at SVA in their social documentary filmmaking program. And yeah, so to have their support was totally critical for this process. And then just, you know, being surrounded by those young girls in the film, they have so much spirit and humor, and like resilience doesn't even begin to cover it. So I got most of my strength from them. And I guess when we started showing the films, and especially in community screenings, like when we would do rough cut screenings with the girls and their families, getting their reactions was, you know, kept me going and kept me motivated, and just reminded me, and still does, you know, they still ask to see clips that they hadn't seen before, or photos from this day or whatever. And so seeing that it still brings them some joy and pride and strength in getting through some darker moments for them also just brings a lot of meaning to the process for me. And I would say I very, very rarely feel like a badass. I mostly am like fumbling through the day, just trying to keep up with whatever is happening and make sure I'm hitting record at the right time. So I would say that might also be important for other people who are not feeling like a badass, because you don't always feel that way. And, you know, that doesn't mean that you're not making something that's meaningful and will bring some good into the world. But, you know, once in a while, when you get home at the end of a very long day and you're exhausted and sunburnt and covered in mosquito bites, and realize that you hadn't stopped to, you know, think all day because you were just following the action and filming, I guess that's when I feel like, you know, I've just been completely immersed in the process, and that's when I feel like a badass.
Great. And Kristen, from you, what nourishes you and makes you feel like a badass?
Well, first of all, I apologize for my location change, but it is what makes me feel like a badass, which is my 7-month-old daughter, and the fact that I can still do this and make films and also be a mom, which I think is really cool.
Very badass.
And I never, I didn't appreciate it until I did it, just how amazing the women are that can, you know, do both and pull them off.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. But in terms of what sustains me, you know, it's honestly what everybody just said about relationships. I've directed 4 short documentaries up to this point, and the subjects from each of those films I have lifelong friendships with. I keep in touch with them on a weekly basis, and it's absolutely why I do this. Those relationships are so important to me. None have been more special than the girls in Blackfeet boxing. A story that's really, really close to my heart is the last shoot that I had on the Blackfeet reservation was last October, and I was 6.5 months pregnant. And at the end of the shoot, we basically filmed their end of year banquet. And I shut the camera off and I was ready to head out. And they called me into the ring, and they actually did a naming ceremony. They gave me an Indian name, and they blessed my baby, and they had sewn like clothes for my daughter and all of these things. And it was honestly, it brought me to tears because, you know, after a year of you know, documenting their story and their journey, for them to kind of give that back to me, it was really, really special. And it's definitely the reason why I want to continue to share stories that are inspiring.
Wow.
There are a lot of good
you.
people in the world.
Yep. I've got a few questions here from the Q&A. Actually, apparently I've got 7, so we best get asking some of them. And then I just want to leave something for you. I'm going to say the name Taiki Watiti, because Taiki, as an Indigenous filmmaker, is now making Marvel. And I guess my question I was wondering about last night, when will it be a woman Indigenous filmmaker that's making Hollywood making films about perhaps non-Indigenous subjects directly, still universal themes perhaps. But anyway, I have a question here from Rio, who says, is there anything that producers have told you that was shocking?
Not recently, but when I started my career about 15 years ago, every time I had an idea for a TV show or a film, or mainly TV, and it had either an Indigenous character or was Indigenous theme or just me being an Indigenous person. As soon as even if they were interested in the subject matter, as soon as the word Indigenous, First Nation, Mohawk, anything of that came up, I could see the change in the way they were listening. And all of a sudden, like, there's like, I don't know, it's as if I lost credibility or something. And then they would pull away, and then they would say, well, you guys have APTN, which is like the Aboriginal People's Television Network here in Canada.
Oh.
Why don't you go see them with your story? So I think for me, that sentence that I've heard from different broadcasters, 99.9% of the time men, that for me is like, after so many years of hearing that, it became hurtful and I became really annoyed. Luckily, I don't hear that anymore, which is a good thing. Yeah. But that for me was like probably the worst thing produced. Like it wasn't coming from a producer, it's coming from a broadcaster.
Right. Yeah. So what words of advice then would you give aspiring Indigenous female directors?
Me?
Yep, I'll ask you, I'll ask Jessie, I'll ask Michelle. It's this is one of our attendees. They've chosen to remain anonymous, but yeah, it's a Q&A for the audience.
I would say for filmmakers, start by writing what you know. Write your truth. Don't try to write it for someone else or about another, don't go too far, because there's a great chance that what you have to say has not been said yet, has not been heard yet. Mm-hmm. And people need those human stories. They need to see other people that are different from them and why they're different. And so I would say write what you know and don't be afraid of that story.
Okay. Jessie, do you have some advice for inspiring young filmmaker?
Yeah, I would say if there is a film that you admire or a filmmaker that you admire, to reach out to them, especially with documentary film. I don't know anyone that's working in this industry that isn't extremely dedicated to the craft and passionate about the work and really invested in bringing more voices into the conversations. And I've reached out to people, you know, just kind of cold calling, cold emailing, and I've always gotten responses. So I would, yeah, and especially to young female directors and young female Indigenous directors, I think, you know, we don't want to be annoying, we don't want to bother people, and you know, it's like we need permission to do to ask for that sort of time and attention. But just, you know, ignore that for now. Write the email, make the phone call. The worst thing they can say is no, but I think chances are pretty good they'd be open to, you know, giving you feedback on your cut or helping you find some resources to make your film or whatever it is you need.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really key, isn't it? So how do we nurture, how do we, as perhaps more experienced people, become sponsors and not just mentors of young Indigenous creatives, so that we're, you know, literally, you know, introducing them to other people? I think that's key. I can remember a friend of mine, she was head of children's for Cartoon Network, Heather Kenyon, and she would have pictures put underneath the toilet stall door at Cannes. like, you know, like, you can't afford to be polite and meek and stand in a corner when other people are pushing their pictures in the restroom, you know, like, so, but again, that can be culturally completely not appropriate or inappropriate. So yeah. Other questions. We have one here. Are there any animated Indigenous films that you'd like to see made or that you've seen that you'd recommend?
There's a few TV shows that are based on legends that I've seen that are very well made, that I would like to see those legends in actually cinematic form as opposed to television form, and it's often catered to children. That would be interesting to see at some point, to see our stories and our legends come to life that are maybe harder to bring to the screen in live action, but could easily be made in an animation.
Yeah, PBS, I don't know if it's in Canada, but I know it's in the States. They did I think it's an 8-part series on stories of the Haudenosaunee and our creation story, which was really, really beautifully done. I only saw the first one and I thought it was great. So there's that one. And Amazon Prime had also one. I can't remember the name of it though. I'm so sorry. But it was about a young woman and really sort of like going through her process of decolonizing and, you know, finding her Indigenous roots. And then it was kind of this mix between, you know, her finding her spirituality and some people thinking she's crazy, you know, the mainstream thinking she was crazy. I cannot remember the name of it, but it was actually really good. But that was another animated series. Sorry to mention it, I don't have the name.
Okay. Now, so what you've all engaged in incredible Q&As over the past few days, and many of you have appeared at other film festivals. What questions would you really like to ask of each other, or what question do you wish you'd been asked? Now you do look like the Brady Bunch in gallery view.
I guess I'd like to know from the other filmmakers in this Zoom, what has been the most trying day on a film set or filming a documentary, and how did you overcome that day?
I think for me, one of the toughest was having a subject not show up and just being completely unreachable. That was really hard, and having a film crew on site ready to go and trying to save the moment, because all we had was that one day to be able to capture the story. And so we had to very, very quickly scramble. And I was, you know, 1,500 miles away, not even there on the ground, and really trying to just have to save the story. So that was, for me, that was one of the very big challenging moments. Like there's just these very unexpected things that you really can't account for until you get there. So yeah.
I think for me, especially on Rustic, the most challenging thing was when some of the scenes that were harder emotionally, and we had to take the time to make sure that everyone felt safe in that space, tackling that subject. It was hard to keep it going because, you know, time is money when you're shooting a film and you have all your crew waiting and there's pressure to make the day because you don't have the money to go overtime. But at the same time, you're working on something that's so delicate and so important. And so that and the fact that I made a little child cry on screen, I really struggled with that. Like it's powerful in the film, and it's okay. It's good that it's there. I'm happy it's there. I think it's important. But in the moment, shooting that scene and seeing her cry, because she was in tears. Like it's not a fake cry. She was in tears. I felt so bad after that because and at the end of the day, I was like, this is just a film and I'm making another human being, a little girl, cry. So that for me was probably one of the hardest parts of shooting any film, anything that I've ever done. That was probably one of the hardest moments.
There was one day when we were filming, when Shayna had relapsed and disappeared for a while, and she all of a sudden, you know, came back. And so I was filming a little bit with her. She was just in a really dark place, kind of coming down from being on drugs, and her mom was there in a lot of pain. So it was just a very difficult emotional day. And I think being kind of flying solo often is fine, but I think the lesson there for me was just making sure there are people kind of on call, especially when you might be going into a difficult situation, and just making sure you have some support at the end of the day to even just kind of debrief and unpack everything that just happened. And I would ask you the same question if you have a day that you face some great difficulties, Kristen.
Yeah, so it's relevant to what we're talking about, female empowerment. It happened really early in my career, and I'll never forget it. It was one of the first shoots that I had ever directed, and there was a male cameraman who had just been taking advantage of me all day and really treating me with not very much respect, and kind of second guessing all of the decisions I was making. And we ended up being about 20 minutes late for our dinner break because we were finishing up an interview. And he, in front of like the entire crew and the subject of our film, started screaming at me and cursing at me for making him 20 minutes late to his dinner break. And I remember trying to keep it together, trying to be composed, but just like walking out and hysterically crying afterwards and being like, you know what, this is not for me, this career. Like, it's too cutthroat and high strung. And there was only one other woman on the crew at the shoot, and she pulled me aside and she was like, this is literally only going to make you stronger. Do not let him talk to you that way. You are really good. Your instincts are good, even though you're young. And someday he's going to wish that he was working with you. And it's not to tell the story of like how it all comes around, but you know, I ended up growing in my career, and 8 years later having a lot of success. And I never called him again. I never called to work with him. He was a freelancer. And he wrote me an email eight years later, and he apologized for his behavior that day and said that he would be honored to work with me again. So it just goes to show that there are tough days where you're going to feel like you don't want to do this and it's too hard and people make you feel really badly and inferior. But it's really important just to trust your instincts and know that, you know, if you feel like you're meant to tell this story, then you should be telling the story. And don't let anyone else tell you that you shouldn't be.
If I may add to that, Kristen, as well, I had a very similar experience working with a major motion picture with a director, and I was serving as a writer and consultant, and I had a very similar situation of a man, the director, very famous Hollywood director, really just treat me horribly. And I was there consulting on a film about an Indigenous woman. And I was like, how is this happening? And I remember after that moment, I called up one of our, female leaders, a clan mother, and my mom, and they both gave me the same advice, which was, do not let him talk to you this way. Remind him of who you are. So when we're thinking about, young directors, filmmakers that might be out there, when you're out there in the field, I give that same advice as well. So I took their advice and I turned back around and I actually went to him and said, you do not have the right to talk to me like this. And, I will walk. So remember who you're making this film about. And so, it's really standing up for yourself when you need to, and not letting people talk down to you.
Unmute. Yes. So, do you want to talk about your future projects, or do you feel talked out enough about those in previous Q&As? That's one of the questions from one of our audience members.
I can start. So as I said before, I work for ESPN, and we're actually kind of on a shoot freeze right now with the pandemic happening. But I've actually started to work on a podcast, which is a new thing for me. And it's basically a non-narrated podcast about the day, March 11th, 2020, and kind of how the sports world kind of changed the conversation around COVID and how people were reacting to it with the NBA shutting down. So we're interviewing a lot of different players from the NBA and a lot of people involved in sports and how they kind of influenced the government and other people's reactions to the pandemic. So it's something that's very out of my wheelhouse, both in topic and that it's a podcast, but it's a new challenge and I'm trying to, roll with it. And I'm excited to kind of try something new.
About you, Sonia, are you working on something during this pandemic?
Yeah, the pandemic didn't change much for me except for the theatrical release of my film, which was scheduled for the end of March. So obviously that didn't happen, but we just released it a couple of weeks ago. But I was already writing a drama series, so I managed to just finish writing it a little quicker because I was at home. It wasn't easy because we have 3 kids, so it's managing, kids at home and writing, but we battled through. And so the series is in the typical funding wheel right now, getting all the dollars in. And if everything goes well, we start shooting in February. So.
And what's that for? Is it for a streaming service or for television?
It's for television, and it's a 6-part miniseries based on residential schools here specifically in Quebec on the French side. Because for some reason in Canada, like in Quebec, we tend to think that, colonialism was worse in English Canada and not in French Canada, but that's completely false. There were residential schools in Quebec. So it's based on a family that goes through that process. So we kind of follow different timelines of their life when they're children and now when they're older, trying to reconnect.
Michelle, your next project?
Oh gosh, there's just so many. I mean, I have this multimedia platform, right? So I'm actually transitioning just like the rest of the world. And so I'm actually looking for a new editor-in-chief to fill my shoes to run the magazine. And what I'm going to do from there is start to kind of focus more on the media creation itself. I've been working on a story, a love story, modern love story, and working on that with my husband and another writer. And So that's a lot of fun. And just continuing to roll out our platform and the work and the sisters, Indigenous sisters who we support. So there's very many different arms to the work that I do. So it's not just straightforward film. I'm actually still kind of relatively a new filmmaker. And but it's just a lot of fun. It's a very, you know, creative space with a lot going on.
Awesome. And Jessie?
I have a few things at the very beginning stages. One is a short about a young woman in Brooklyn who just won state assembly. And she's also a field nurse, so she visits young, new and expecting mothers in their homes in Brooklyn. And so she has a very holistic view of healthcare and is, you know, hopefully bringing that background into policy in New York to provide better healthcare, especially to women of color. And in October, I'll be going to Texas for a couple months for a short series of shorts about different approaches to healing mental health issues, addiction and depression and various ways of healing.
Fantastic. Quick question for you, Kristen. Somebody said, I had to work during the screening of Blackfeet Boxing. Is there any other way I can see it some other time? Thank you.
Yes. So right now it's actually streaming on ESPN's streaming service, ESPN Plus. So if you just type in Blackfeet Boxing, it should show up. Easy way to see it.
Awesome. Well, our time together is coming almost to a close. So I'm just wondering, is there anything I've left out or anything else you'd like to add? One thing I'd like to add is how I would like to assist to be a great ally of empowering Indigenous women filmmakers and media creators is through having them as students at the Johnny Carson Center for Emerging Media Arts at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. For me, it's about being very intentional about how we recruit and to create those kinds of pipelines and pathways for people to be able to access higher education or summer camps and things like that. So hit me up if you have any ideas or aspiring young people out there. That would be wonderful to meet them. But yeah, anything else from any of you all that you'd like to share or ask each other? I swear that's a green screen in your daughter's bedroom there, Sonia.
No, it does make my face green though, because you know, everything's green everywhere.
Exactly.
I think one of the things I'd like to say, earlier you were talking about advice that you would give to other filmmakers. And I think what's really important is to follow your instinct. I really love, Sonia, what you said about, you know, really going with what you know, following your voice. I know when I started Rematriation, I had some folks along the way who had said to me, you know, why do you want to tell these, you know, sad stories? And I thought to myself, like, this is my life. Like, this is my people. Like, I have to tell it. And it's all not sad. And I think the tough part is that because there's not enough content out there telling the stories, that people don't realize that there's just this beautiful, rich culture, beautiful stories of, you know, teaching us how to live as human beings, you know, different perspectives. And it's not all doom and gloom and sadness by any measure, right? Yeah, there are tough subjects that need to be tackled. And I think film is such a beautiful way to be able to share the stories. So I think that that's really important, is if you have an interest in it or you're already on that path, like, don't be afraid. This is the time. Do it now. You know, get out there, tell the story, just make it happen in whatever way that you can, right? Because I'm sure with all of us here as filmmakers, like, there's, you know, so much to filmmaking that you never probably expected, right? And so it's a lot of work for sure, but to stick with it and follow your instinct, make it happen.
Awesome.
Wise words to finish on. Make it happen. I like that.
Yeah, make it happen. And the other words that came up for me a lot during this last part of the panel was to stand your ground. And Yeah, so I thank all of you. Honestly, I was been very nervous coming into this. It's such an honor to be amongst you all and to learn from you. It was thrilling, and I can't wait to see what it is that you do next. And that and I really feel that all of us will go back out into the world, us and the people watching, with doing something to empower our Indigenous women filmmakers and storytellers. So thanks a lot, and take very good care in this crazy time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.